Emmett Sanders was 43 years old, and every night he cleaned marble floors inside one of Chicago's tallest office towers. Most people believed he was a tired janitor who had wasted his life chasing nothing bigger than an hourly paycheck. His faded gray uniform, dented white Ford Transit van, and scratched metal lunch cooler seemed to prove them right. What nobody knew was that the quiet man pushing a mop after midnight owned the company stitched above his own name tag. Then Olivia slid the divorce papers across the kitchen island, her diamond bracelet clicking against the cold stone as Emmett reached for them with perfectly steady hands. "Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel, and if you love slow-burning dramas filled with secrets, betrayal, and unexpected justice, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss tomorrow's story." The townhouse on South Lombard Avenue in Oak Park looked exactly the way Olivia Sanders wanted it to look. Every flower in the front yard bloomed on schedule. Every window reflected the morning sun without a fingerprint. The black iron mailbox matched the front door. Even the white curtains inside seemed arranged with mathematical precision. It was the kind of house people slowed down to admire while walking their dogs. Inside, however, silence had become another piece of furniture. Emmett Sanders stepped through the garage entrance every morning a little after 5:30. His boots carried traces of floor wax and elevator dust from downtown Chicago, and his gray maintenance uniform smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and industrial soap. He never walked through the front door anymore. Without saying a word, he removed his boots on the rubber mat beside the washing machine, folded his work gloves into his lunch cooler, and slipped quietly upstairs while the neighborhood was only beginning to wake. He had learned to move softly, not because he feared making noise, because silence asked fewer questions. Olivia usually left for work around 8. She worked as a luxury branding consultant for upscale boutiques along Michigan Avenue, where appearances could be worth millions of dollars. She understood colors, logos, fabrics, and first impressions better than most executives understood balance sheets. Somewhere along the way, she had started treating marriage the same way. Image first, reality later. Emmett noticed the changes gradually. His framed photo on the hallway shelf disappeared. Their wedding picture moved from the living room to the upstairs hallway where visitors rarely walked. His heavy work boots no longer stayed beside the front entrance. One afternoon he found them hidden behind storage bins in the basement. He simply picked them up and returned them to the mat. The next day they disappeared again. He never mentioned it. Years earlier, Olivia used to wait awake when his shift ended. She would make coffee before sunrise and ask him how many floors he had cleaned that night. Now, she barely looked up from her phone. Sometimes, she didn't even know he had come home. Neighbors admired them. They saw an attractive couple with stable careers and a beautiful townhouse 15 minutes from downtown Chicago. No one saw how rarely they laughed together anymore. No one noticed that Olivia stopped introducing him by his name. She preferred softer descriptions. "My husband works nights. My husband handles maintenance. My husband is between larger projects." Each sentence moved a little farther from the truth. Emmett never corrected anyone. He simply stood beside her with his hands folded, letting strangers fill the silence with their own assumptions. The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala arrived in early October. It was held inside the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel overlooking Lake Michigan. Crystal chandeliers glowed above hundreds of guests dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns. Valets lined up imported cars outside while photographers waited near the entrance. Emmett wore the only black suit he owned. It had been tailored almost 10 years earlier. The cuffs showed slight wear. The shoes had been polished so carefully that even the tiny scratches disappeared beneath fresh shine. He looked respectable. Simple, comfortable, invisible. Olivia wore a silver evening dress that caught every light in the room. People recognized her. They admired her clients and complimented her fashion campaigns. She smiled easily, until conversations turned toward Emmett. A real estate developer asked politely, "And what line of work are you in?" Emmett opened his mouth. Olivia answered first. "He's exploring a few business opportunities right now." The developer nodded politely before turning away. Emmett said nothing. His eyes wandered toward the ballroom ceiling instead. The crystal lights reflected across hundreds of tiny mirrors. Beautiful things often hid strong steel behind them. He wondered if people were built the same way. Dinner ended close to 10. The orchestra played quietly while donors exchanged business cards. Olivia disappeared for nearly 20 minutes. When she returned, she claimed she had been speaking with clients near the terrace. Emmett simply nodded. He noticed small things: the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne, the lipstick she had quietly reapplied, the smile that faded before she reached the table. Nothing dramatic, only details. He had spent years cleaning office buildings after thousands of people passed through them every day. The smallest stain often revealed the largest spill. On the drive home, Olivia spent most of the trip looking out the passenger window. Streetlights flashed across the windshield. Neither spoke. The radio remained off. When they reached the townhouse, Olivia walked upstairs carrying her phone. Emmett remained downstairs to wash his coffee thermos. The house was completely quiet except for the sound of running water. Then he heard the vibration. Not a ringtone, just a single buzz against hardwood flooring upstairs. He glanced toward the staircase. A few seconds later, another vibration followed, then another. Footsteps crossed the bedroom floor. The bedroom door closed. Minutes passed. When Olivia came downstairs again, her expression looked perfectly calm. She poured herself sparkling water and set her phone face down on the kitchen counter. For just 1 second before the screen went dark, Emmett caught a name glowing across the display: Nathan Pierce. He dried his hands with a dish towel and looked away before she noticed. Outside, autumn wind pushed leaves across the quiet street. Inside, something much colder had just entered the house. 3 mornings after the charity gala, Emmett Sanders woke just before noon to the sound of rain tapping softly against the bedroom window. Chicago in October often looked gray enough to erase the skyline. The clouds hung low over Oak Park, and the streets outside were covered with wet maple leaves that clung stubbornly to the sidewalks. The townhouse felt unusually quiet. Olivia had already left for work. Her coffee cup sat in the sink. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the hallway. The bed on her side remained perfectly made. It reminded Emmett of a hotel room after checkout, clean, organized, and strangely empty. He walked downstairs wearing an old navy sweatshirt and made himself scrambled eggs before sitting alone at the kitchen island. For nearly 20 years, breakfast had always been his favorite meal. It was the only part of the day untouched by deadlines, meetings, or phone calls. Lately, even breakfast felt borrowed. His phone buzzed once. The screen displayed an automated reminder from the electric company. Nothing unusual. Nothing important. He finished eating, washed the plate, and prepared to leave for his own errands before reporting to work that evening. As he grabbed his keys from the entry table, he noticed something unusual. The upstairs office door was slightly open. Olivia always closed it before leaving. Always. Not halfway, not almost, completely. It was a habit she never broke. Emmett stood still for several seconds. His eyes rested on the narrow opening. Then he walked upstairs. The office overlooked the backyard through tall windows framed with white curtains. Everything looked ordinary. Bookshelves, computer, printer, family photos, neatly stacked notebooks. Yet something felt different. He couldn't explain why. Years of inspecting office buildings had taught him that disorder rarely announced itself loudly. Sometimes a chair sat 2 inches farther from a desk. Sometimes a file cabinet remained unlocked. Sometimes someone used the wrong trash bin. Tiny details spoke first. He walked toward the mahogany desk. Nothing appeared disturbed. Then he noticed one corner of the filing cabinet drawer was not fully closed. Barely half an inch. He pulled gently. Inside were folders arranged alphabetically: insurance, taxes, mortgage, utilities, retirement. Toward the back sat a simple blue folder without a label. The color alone caught his attention. Everything Olivia organized used printed labels. This one did not. He hesitated. His hand rested against the drawer. His breathing remained steady. Then he opened it. Inside were legal documents. The first page immediately carried the words "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." His eyes remained fixed. He turned the page. Then another. Then another. The filing had already been drafted: property division, asset disclosure, spousal maintenance, attorney consultation notes, even proposed dates. Everything appeared carefully prepared. Everything except one thing. He had never seen any of it before. He continued reading. According to the paperwork, Olivia claimed she had supported the household financially for years, while her husband worked low-paying maintenance jobs with limited future prospects. She described Emmett as emotionally unavailable and professionally stagnant. She implied she had carried the marriage alone. Emmett looked around the empty office. Outside, rain continued falling against the windows. Inside, nothing moved. He felt no anger. Not yet. Only a strange quietness, the same quietness that settled over an office tower after midnight when thousands of employees finally went home. He reached into his pocket and removed his phone. Without disturbing a single page, he photographed every document carefully. Front, back, every attachment, every handwritten note. When finished, he placed everything back exactly where he had found it. Drawer aligned. Folder centered. Nothing disturbed. No fingerprints remained. He closed the cabinet. Then he left the room. The entire visit had lasted less than 4 minutes. By evening, Emmett was back inside Whitmore and Klein Tower on Wacker Drive. The 64-story glass building overlooked the Chicago River, glowing blue against the night sky. Most executives had already gone home. Only security staff and maintenance crews remained. Emmett changed into his gray uniform inside the basement locker room. The embroidered patch over his chest simply read Sanders & Cole Facility Solutions. Few people ever looked closely enough to read it. He wheeled his janitor cart toward the executive floors. Vacuum, mop bucket, glass cleaner, fresh trash liners. Exactly the same routine as every night. Routine gave people permission to ignore you. He had learned that years ago. The executive conference rooms overlooked the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Leather chairs surrounded polished walnut tables. Coffee cups remained beside half-finished reports. Computer monitors slept silently. Emmett emptied wastebaskets one by one. Receipts, sticky notes, disposable coffee lids. Nothing unusual. Until he reached conference room 48B. Someone had left behind several crumpled expense reports inside the recycling bin. Most cleaning staff would have dumped them without looking. Emmett unfolded the first page only to separate paper from plastic. Then his eyes stopped. Vendor name Pierce Strategic Consulting. The name struck him immediately. Nathan Pierce. The same name that had appeared on Olivia's phone. The same name glowing briefly across the kitchen counter only days earlier. The invoice listed consulting fees totaling nearly $83,000. Emergency Facilities Assessment. 3 words. 3 expensive words. Emmett frowned slightly. He knew the building. He knew every mechanical room, every air handler, every emergency repair completed during the past 6 months. There had been no emergency assessment. None. He folded the paper neatly and placed it back exactly where it belonged. Then he continued cleaning. His mop moved across marble floors with slow, even strokes. His expression never changed, only his thoughts grew sharper. Near midnight, Luis Ramirez approached from the security desk carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "You look tired tonight," Luis said quietly. Emmett accepted the cup. "Long week." Luis nodded. "Corporate people make messes faster than we can clean them." A faint smile crossed Emmett's face. "That's usually true." The 2 men stood silently overlooking the empty lobby while rain streaked down the glass walls outside. Luis returned to his station. Emmett continued toward the executive suites. As the elevator doors closed behind him, he reached into his pocket and glanced once more at the photographs stored on his phone. Divorce papers, financial statements, legal notes. Then his mind returned to the invoice he had just found upstairs. The same name now appeared in 2 completely different worlds, his marriage and his workplace. Somewhere between them, a connection was waiting to be uncovered. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning. They did not come through the mail. They did not arrive in a lawyer's envelope. Olivia Sanders placed them on the kitchen island herself. The townhouse was quiet, except for the ticking clock above the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic drifting through the partially opened window. Outside, children were walking toward Longfellow Elementary School with oversized backpacks and bright jackets against the October wind. Inside, the air felt heavier than the gray clouds hanging over Oak Park. Emmett had just returned from another overnight shift. His gray work shirt was neatly buttoned. The embroidered logo above his pocket carried the familiar blue letters of Sanders & Cole Facility Solutions. His boots rested beside the garage entrance exactly where he always left them. He washed his hands carefully before sitting at the kitchen island. Olivia stood across from him with a white ceramic coffee mug resting between both hands. She looked composed, too composed, almost rehearsed. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she pushed a thick envelope across the polished stone countertop. The sound of paper sliding over granite echoed softly through the kitchen. "I think this is the best decision for both of us." Her voice was calm, professional, almost detached. Emmett lowered his eyes toward the envelope. His own name appeared neatly typed across the front. He opened it slowly. Inside rested nearly 40 pages. Petition for dissolution of marriage, property proposals, financial requests, attorney correspondence. Everything carefully organized, everything already prepared. He turned one page after another without changing expression. The only movement came from his thumb sliding along the edges. Olivia watched him carefully, perhaps expecting anger, perhaps expecting confusion, perhaps hoping for both. Instead, she found neither. Finally, Emmett looked up. "When did you decide this?" The question carried no accusation, only curiosity. Olivia exhaled quietly. "I've been unhappy for years." The words hung in the room. Rain began tapping softly against the kitchen window. Emmett nodded once. "I see." Nothing more. That answer seemed to irritate her. She crossed her arms. "I don't think you do." He waited. Silence often invited people to continue talking. She did. "I've spent years trying to build a better life. I've worked hard. I've built relationships. I've built a career. And every time someone asks what my husband does..." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "I have to explain that you're a janitor." The word landed harder than she intended. She noticed it immediately, yet she did not take it back. Emmett simply looked toward the rain outside. Water rolled slowly down the glass. A bus passed through the intersection, splashing puddles across the curb. He remembered another rainy morning almost 20 years earlier. They had rented a tiny apartment then. Olivia laughed because the roof leaked above the dining table. They placed a cooking pot underneath and ate pancakes anyway. Neither of them had cared about appearances back then. Somewhere along the way, success had changed only one of them. Olivia continued speaking. "You have no ambition. You never wanted more. You've been cleaning floors your entire life. My clients ask about my husband. They expect someone successful. They expect someone driven. I can't keep pretending." The words arrived one after another. Sharp, measured, practiced. Emmett never interrupted. His hands remained folded quietly on the table. He noticed the expensive watch around Olivia's wrist, the diamond bracelet she wore almost every day, the imported coffee machine behind her, the marble countertops, the designer lighting. Most people would have assumed those things represented success. Emmett had spent years inside luxury office towers. He knew polished surfaces often hid cracked foundations. Olivia opened another folder. "I've already spoken with attorneys." She slid another sheet toward him. "I'll keep the townhouse. I'll keep most of the furnishings. I'll need temporary financial support while everything is finalized." The request almost sounded ironic. Financial support. From the man she believed earned little more than hourly wages. Emmett read the page carefully. The calculations underestimated his income dramatically. Whoever drafted the paperwork believed he possessed almost nothing. Savings, retirement, small maintenance salary, no significant investments, no business interests, no corporate ownership. He read every line twice, then folded the pages neatly. Olivia leaned forward. "You can sign now if you want. I'd rather avoid making this ugly." Emmett looked directly into her eyes for the first time that morning. His face remained calm. His voice barely rose above conversation. "I won't sign anything today." She frowned. "Why? I need time. There isn't much to think about." There always is. Another silence settled between them. The refrigerator hummed quietly. Somewhere upstairs, the heating system switched on. Ordinary sounds inside an ordinary house. Yet the room no longer felt familiar. Olivia picked up her coffee. "You've always avoided confrontation. I suppose this is no different." Emmett did not answer. He simply gathered every document into a neat stack. Then, instead of placing them into a briefcase, he slid them carefully inside his old metal lunch cooler. The same scratched cooler he carried to work every night. Olivia stared at him. For a moment, confusion crossed her face. "You carry divorce papers in that thing?" Emmett closed the latch. "It keeps important things safe." He stood, walked toward the garage, pulled on his worn work boots. The leather creaked softly. He picked up his keys. Olivia followed him to the doorway. "Where are you going?" "Work." She looked at the clock. "It's barely noon. I have somewhere to stop first." He stepped outside into the cool autumn air. The white Ford Transit van waited quietly in the driveway. Neighbors walking dogs barely glanced toward him. To them, he was simply the maintenance worker who left at strange hours. Emmett climbed inside. The engine started with its familiar low rumble. He backed slowly onto the street. In the rearview mirror, he saw Olivia standing beneath the porch roof with folded arms. She never waved. He drove east towards downtown Chicago. The interstate traffic thickened near the skyline. Glass towers reflected patches of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Anyone watching his van would assume he was heading toward another ordinary shift with mop buckets and floor polish. Instead, several miles before reaching Whitmore and Klein Tower, Emmett exited onto Lower Wabash Avenue. The van disappeared beneath the streets of downtown Chicago, toward a basement office that almost nobody knew existed. Lower Wabash Avenue looked completely different from the Chicago tourists photographed every summer. There were no architecture cruises, no crowded sidewalks, no cameras pointed toward the skyline. The streets beneath the elevated tracks were darker, older, and lined with loading docks, service entrances, and forgotten brick buildings that had survived generations of change. Emmett Sanders guided his aging white Ford Transit van down a narrow ramp that disappeared beneath street level. The parking garage belonged to a warehouse company that had closed years earlier. Only a handful of tenants still rented office space below ground. To strangers, the place looked abandoned. That was precisely why Emmett liked it. He parked beside a concrete pillar marked B3 and shut off the engine. For several moments, he remained seated with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The divorce papers still sat inside the metal lunch cooler on the passenger seat. Outside, water dripped steadily from exposed pipes overhead. The underground garage smelled faintly of damp concrete and motor oil. He picked up the cooler and walked toward an unmarked steel door. A keypad blinked softly beside the frame. 4 digits. A short pause. 2 more digits. The lock clicked open. The hallway beyond looked ordinary. Gray carpet, white walls, old fluorescent lighting. Nothing suggested that one of Illinois' largest privately owned facility management companies operated quietly behind those doors. Halfway down the corridor hung a brushed steel plaque. Sanders and Coal Facility Solutions, corporate administration, no logo, no advertising, no unnecessary decoration. Emmett entered without knocking. Inside, the atmosphere changed immediately. Large digital monitors displayed maintenance schedules across dozens of commercial buildings throughout Illinois. Maps tracked overnight service crews. Contract reports covered one wall. Conference rooms lined the opposite side of the office. Employees looked up briefly as Emmett walked inside. No one greeted him with surprise. To them, he was not a janitor. He was the founder. Several managers nodded respectfully before returning to work. Emmett acknowledged each one with the same quiet smile. His office remained exactly as he had left it. Simple oak desk, leather chair, family photographs. Bookshelves filled with maintenance manuals instead of business trophies. The framed picture nearest the window showed 2 younger men wearing work boots and dusty coveralls beside an old pickup truck. One was Emmett. The other was Harold Cole. 23 years earlier, they had cleaned warehouses together after losing jobs at a bankrupt maintenance contractor. They started with 1 truck, 3 mops, a borrowed vacuum cleaner. Neither had imagined they would eventually manage contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Harold had passed away from pancreatic cancer 6 years earlier. His photograph never left the desk. Emmett placed the lunch cooler beside it, then sat quietly. The office door opened a minute later. Rebecca Lawson entered carrying 2 legal folders and a tablet computer. She was 56 years old, silver-haired, direct, and widely respected among Chicago corporate attorneys. She had represented Emmett and Sanders and Cole for almost 18 years. She took one look at the lunch cooler and raised an eyebrow. So, it finally happened. Emmett nodded once. It did. Rebecca sat opposite him without speaking. She waited. She knew silence often produced better answers than questions. Emmett opened the cooler. One by one, he removed the divorce papers and spread them neatly across the desk. Rebecca adjusted her glasses and began reading. The room remained silent except for pages turning. Outside the office windows, employees moved calmly between departments. Phones rang occasionally. Printers hummed. Normal business continued while a marriage quietly unraveled behind closed doors. After nearly 20 minutes, Rebecca placed the last page on the desk. "They've underestimated you." Emmett leaned back slightly. I noticed. They believe your annual income is under $60,000. They missed by quite a bit. Neither smiled. Rebecca tapped the financial disclosure section. They also believe most marital assets belong jointly to both parties. They don't. Years earlier, before marrying Olivia, Rebecca herself had insisted Emmett place Sanders and Cole ownership into a protected trust structure connected to Harold Cole's family estate. The arrangement had been perfectly legal, perfectly documented, and almost entirely invisible. Olivia had never shown interest in corporate paperwork. She assumed Emmett simply worked for the company. She never asked deeper questions. He never volunteered them. Rebecca continued reading. Then she stopped suddenly. What is this? She pointed toward a photocopied invoice Emmett had placed beneath the divorce documents. Pierce Strategic Consulting, Emergency Facilities Assessment, $83,000. Emmett explained where he had found it. Then he mentioned Nathan Pierce, the name on Olivia's phone, the name inside the home office documents, the name on Whitmore and Klein invoices. Rebecca listened carefully without interruption. When he finished, she folded her hands. I don't believe in coincidence. Neither do I. She opened her tablet. Within seconds, multiple corporate databases appeared across the screen. Vendor registrations, state business filings, commercial property contracts. Nathan Pierce's consulting company appeared repeatedly across multiple maintenance invoices. Several contracts had been signed within the last 12 months. Amounts varied: $40,000, $70,000, $120,000, always labeled consulting, always vaguely described. Rebecca frowned. These numbers don't make sense. Emmett stood and walked toward the large city map mounted on the wall. Colored pins marked Sanders and Cole service locations throughout Illinois. Whitmore and Klein Tower stood highlighted in blue. He stared at it quietly. Years earlier, he had insisted on personally inspecting several downtown contracts by working anonymously among overnight janitorial crews. Boardrooms showed reports. Hallways showed truth. That philosophy had built his company. Now it might save it. Rebecca closed the tablet. Listen carefully. You have two separate issues now: a divorce and possibly corporate fraud. You cannot allow emotion to mix them. Emmett nodded. I know. No confrontation. No accusations. No scenes. No private investigations beyond legal boundaries. You document. You preserve evidence. You let attorneys and auditors do their jobs. She slid the divorce papers back toward him. Has Olivia signed these? Yes. And you? No. Good. Rebecca stood and walked toward the window overlooking the operations floor. Dozens of employees coordinated overnight service routes across Chicago. Janitors, engineers, floor technicians, custodians, electricians. Thousands of families depended on Sanders and Cole. One emotional mistake could threaten all of them. She turned back toward Emmett. I have another question. Ask. Does Olivia know who you really are? Emmett looked toward Harold Cole's photograph. His answer came quietly. I don't think she ever wanted to know. Rebecca remained silent for several seconds. Then she gathered the legal papers into a folder. I'll begin preparing our response. I'll also contact compliance regarding these invoices. If fraud exists, we'll find it. She walked toward the door before stopping one last time. One more thing. Emmett looked up. Rebecca smiled faintly. If your wife thinks she's divorcing a janitor, let her keep believing it a little longer. The office door closed softly behind her. Emmett remained alone. Outside his window, downtown Chicago continued moving as if nothing had changed. Traffic crossed the bridges. Elevated trains rattled overhead. Thousands of office workers hurried through lunch meetings. No one knew that beneath the city streets, two investigations had quietly become one. And somewhere above them all, Nathan Pierce had no idea someone was already following the money. Friday evening settled slowly over Chicago. The last orange light faded behind the skyline, while office workers poured onto sidewalks carrying briefcases and paper coffee cups eager to escape another week downtown. Traffic crawled through Fulton Market. Luxury restaurants illuminated their patios with warm string lights. Valets hurried between imported sedans and polished SUVs while couples laughed beneath outdoor heaters. The neighborhood had once been warehouses and meat packing plants. Now it had become one of the city's most expensive places to be seen. Emmett Sanders parked his aging Ford Transit nearly half a block away. The old van looked almost invisible beside rows of black Mercedes white Range Rovers and electric sports cars. That suited him perfectly. He switched off the engine but remained inside. Rain from earlier had left the pavement reflecting hundreds of lights like broken mirrors. Across the street stood Maison Vert, one of the newest French restaurants in Fulton Market. Reservations often required weeks. Corporate executives loved it. So did politicians. So did people who wanted photographs more than dinner. Emmett looked at the dashboard clock. 7:02 p.m. Rebecca Lawson had advised patience. No confrontations, no assumptions, only observation. He intended to follow that advice. At exactly 7:08, a black BMW sedan rolled slowly toward the valet stand. Nathan Pierce stepped out first. Even from half a block away, confidence seemed to surround him. Tailored charcoal suit, expensive leather shoes, silver watch catching the restaurant lights. He handed his keys to the valet without looking. A man accustomed to attention. Seconds later, another vehicle stopped behind him, a white rideshare SUV. Olivia emerged from the rear passenger seat. She wore a cream-colored coat over a dark evening dress. Her hair had been carefully styled. She smiled before she even reached the sidewalk. Nathan stepped forward. They embraced briefly, not long enough to attract attention, long enough for Emmett to notice. He remained motionless inside the van. No anger crossed his face, no sudden movement. He simply watched. Olivia laughed as Nathan said something impossible to hear from across the street. Then she slipped her left hand into her coat pocket. When it emerged again, her wedding ring was gone. She placed it inside a small handbag before taking Nathan's arm. Together, they disappeared through the restaurant entrance. The glass doors closed behind them. The street continued moving. Nobody else seemed to notice. A city of nearly 3 million people often ignored its smallest betrayals. Emmett leaned back against his seat. His breathing remained slow, steady. The dashboard reflected faintly across the windshield. He thought about the first ring he had bought Olivia. It had cost $600. He remembered saving almost 8 months for it while working double shifts cleaning warehouses outside Joliet. She had cried when he proposed beside Lake Michigan. She once told him she would wear it forever. People changed, sometimes slowly enough that no one noticed until they became strangers. His phone vibrated. "Rebecca," he answered quietly. "Everything all right?" "Yes." "You sound tired." "Long night." "You found anything?" Emmett looked toward the restaurant entrance. "I found confirmation." Rebecca paused. "You have photographs?" "No." "Good. I don't need them." Silence settled between them. Then Rebecca spoke again. "Remember why we're doing this. The truth, not revenge. I know." The call ended. Emmett remained another 20 minutes. He watched waiters carry wine bottles through the windows. He saw Olivia lean across the table while Nathan spoke. He noticed nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Only familiarity, the kind built through repeated meetings rather than chance encounters. That alone was enough. At 7:42 he started the van. He drove away without waiting for dinner to end. By 8:30 he arrived beneath Whitmore and Klein Tower. The 64-story building towered above Wacker Drive, its glass walls reflecting the Chicago River below. The lobby echoed with polished footsteps and quiet conversations as late-working executives hurried toward elevators. Emmett changed into his gray maintenance uniform inside the basement locker room. The routine never varied. Work gloves, radio, utility knife, keys, flashlight, cleaning cart. Luis Ramirez sat behind the security desk watching surveillance monitors. He smiled when Emmett approached. "Evening." "Evening." Luis handed him a paper cup. "Coffee." Emmett accepted it gratefully. "Thanks." Luis studied him for a second. "You all right?" Emmett nodded. "Just thinking." Luis chuckled softly. "My grandmother always said thinking after dark causes trouble." Emmett smiled faintly. She was probably right. The elevator carried him upward toward the executive floors. Most offices were empty. Computer screens glowed silently. Cleaning machines hummed in distant hallways. He worked methodically. Glass partitions, conference tables, reception counters. Nothing escaped his attention. Near 11 o'clock he entered Executive Suite 49. The floor housed Whitmore and Klein's senior management offices. Large windows overlooked the river. Modern artwork decorated every hallway. Everything smelled faintly of cedar wood and fresh carpet. He emptied one wastebasket after another. Receipts, coffee cups, stapled reports, ordinary office trash. Then he reached the private conference room beside the finance department. The cleaning schedule indicated the room had hosted meetings throughout the afternoon. The large recycling container stood nearly full. Emmett tied off one bag, then another. Inside the third bag, something unusual caught his eye. A heavy stack of shredded paper. Not cross-cut, only sliced into long strips. The disposal policy for executive financial records required secure destruction by an outside vendor. This had been shredded incorrectly. Someone had been careless or rushed. Emmett carried the bag toward the sorting table used by maintenance staff to separate recyclable materials. He poured the contents carefully across the surface. Hundreds of paper strips scattered beneath fluorescent lights. Most people would have thrown everything away. Years spent restoring water-damaged contracts had taught Emmett patience. He aligned several strips together, then several more. Words slowly appeared. Emergency consulting, vendor authorization, facilities review, payment approval. One signature line remained partially intact. Nathan Pierce. The name appeared again, this time beside a figure exceeding $127,000. Emmett stared at the fragments. His heartbeat slowed instead of rising. Large fraud rarely began with large lies. It began with ordinary paperwork nobody bothered to read. He folded the reconstructed strips carefully into an evidence envelope supplied by Sanders and Cole compliance procedures. The envelope disappeared inside his work cart. No one noticed. No one questioned a janitor carrying trash. That invisibility had become his greatest advantage. As midnight approached, Luis called quietly over the radio. "Emmett, go ahead." "Legal courier just dropped off certified mail for you. I left it in your locker." Emmett thanked him and continued mopping the marble corridor. The polished floor reflected the ceiling lights like still water. His own reflection moved slowly across the surface, calm, controlled, invisible. But somewhere beyond those empty hallways someone had made a mistake they would soon regret, and whatever waited inside that certified envelope downstairs was about to make the coming weeks far more complicated than a simple divorce. The certified envelope waited exactly where Luis Ramirez had promised. It rested inside the small gray locker assigned to Emmett Sanders in the basement changing room of Whitmore and Klein Tower. Around him, the building had settled into its usual midnight rhythm. Air handlers hummed behind concrete walls. Elevators traveled silently between empty executive floors. Vacuum cleaners echoed faintly somewhere above. Thousands of office workers had gone home hours earlier, leaving behind only security staff, engineers, and janitors. People who kept the city functioning after everyone else stopped paying attention. Emmett removed the envelope carefully. The return address belonged to Cook County Circuit Court. He already knew what it contained before opening it. Temporary relief motion. Olivia's attorneys were requesting temporary spousal maintenance. They argued that she had sacrificed opportunities during the marriage while supporting a husband whose income barely covered household expenses. The filing described Emmett as financially dependent, professionally limited, without meaningful assets. He folded the notice neatly. No anger crossed his face, only disappointment. He placed the papers back inside the envelope and locked the locker. Work still needed to be done, and work had always helped him think. His cleaning cart rolled quietly across polished stone as he entered Executive Level 48. The hallway lights automatically dimmed after business hours, leaving long reflections across marble floors. The emptiness made every sound sharper. The squeak of mop wheels, the spray of glass cleaner, the rustle of trash liners. Years ago, Harold Cole used to joke that janitors knew more company secrets than vice presidents. Executives talked freely when they believed nobody important was nearby. Cleaning crews became invisible. Invisible people heard everything. Emmett reached the finance department shortly after 1 o'clock. Conference rooms remained dark except for one. Light spilled beneath the door. He checked the cleaning schedule. No overnight meetings had been listed. He paused, then continued working nearby without approaching. Voices drifted faintly through the wall. Only fragments reached him. Billing adjustments, consulting approval, quarterly audit, vendor review. Nothing illegal, nothing useful, just disconnected words. 15 minutes later, the lights switched off. 2 men exited, carrying briefcases. One wore a navy suit, the other carried a leather portfolio under his arm. Neither looked toward the janitor mopping quietly beside the elevator. They walked away, still discussing numbers. Emmett memorized both faces anyway. Habits mattered. Small details mattered. He continued toward basement level B2, where maintenance crews sorted recyclable waste before disposal trucks arrived each morning. The sorting area smelled of cardboard and industrial detergent. Stacks of sealed bins lined the walls. Blue for paper, green for plastics, black for secure disposal. One large black container near the loading dock caught his attention. Its security tag hung loose. According to company policy, secure financial waste required locked collection containers. This one had been opened. Someone had forgotten to reseal it, or perhaps never intended to. Emmett knelt beside the container. Inside lay dozens of shredded folders mixed with ordinary office trash. Coffee filters, cardboard, plastic cups, receipts, invoices. He put on fresh gloves, then began separating paper from garbage. The task took nearly 20 minutes. Most strips contained meaningless fragments, meeting agendas, internal memos, lunch receipts. Then another consulting invoice appeared. Pierce Strategic Consulting, again. This time attached to a facilities modernization assessment, $96,000. Emmett examined the document carefully. The building code referenced on the invoice belonged to another property entirely. Someone had copied numbers from an unrelated project. The mistake was subtle, easy to overlook, impossible for him to ignore. He placed the paper inside another compliance envelope, then continued sorting. By 2:30 in the morning, he had recovered 6 additional invoice fragments, each connected to Nathan Pierce, each approved by different managers, each vaguely described: emergency evaluation, structural review, vendor consulting, equipment inspection, large payments, little explanation. Patterns slowly emerged. Patterns built cases, not assumptions, not emotions. Facts. His company had taught every supervisor one principle: document first, speak second. The basement door opened suddenly. Luis stepped inside carrying 2 coffees. "I figured you'd still be awake." Emmett accepted one gratefully. The hot cup warmed his hands. Luis looked toward the scattered papers. "Find something interesting," Emmett answered carefully. "Just paperwork that should have been shredded differently." Luis laughed softly. "Corporate people trust paper too much. They think machines erase mistakes." Emmett looked toward the evidence envelopes. "Sometimes they preserve them." The security guard leaned against a concrete pillar. "You ever think about doing something else?" "What do you mean?" Luis shrugged. "I don't know." "Retire. Buy a cabin somewhere. Go fishing." "You've been doing this forever." Emmett smiled quietly. "I like buildings." Luis chuckled. "That's the strangest answer I've heard all week." Emmett looked around the basement. Exposed pipes, electrical panels, concrete walls, steel beams. He saw something different than most people. Every hallway carried stories. Every stain had a cause. Every broken tile pointed toward neglected maintenance. Every trash bin revealed habits. Buildings spoke. Most people simply never learned their language. Luis finished his coffee. Before leaving, he turned back. "My father cleaned schools for 30 years. People treated him like furniture. But he always said dignity doesn't come from your title. It comes from doing your job when nobody is watching." After the security guard disappeared upstairs, Emmett remained standing in silence. He thought about Harold Cole, about his own father who had repaired city buses until arthritis ended his career, about every overnight worker invisible to daytime executives. He understood them, because he had never stopped being one of them. The digital clock on the wall reached 3:17 a.m. His radio crackled. Maintenance dispatch requested assistance on level 51. Minor water leak. He packed away the evidence envelopes inside a locked compartment beneath his cleaning supplies. To anyone looking inside, only bottles of floor polish and paper towels would be visible. He pushed the cart toward the elevator. The doors closed. As the elevator climbed through the sleeping building, Emmett looked at his own reflection in the stainless steel panels. Gray uniform, simple boots, calloused hands, exactly the appearance Olivia had learned to despise. He felt no shame, only clarity. By dawn, Rebecca Lawson would receive copies of every recovered invoice. Sanders and Cole's compliance department would begin a formal internal review. And somewhere across Chicago, Nathan Pierce would wake believing his secrets remained buried beneath shredded paper and forgotten trash. He had no idea that the quiet janitor cleaning executive offices every night had already started putting every missing piece back together. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. The wind, sweeping across downtown Chicago, carried the first real warning of winter, as lawyers, clerks, and police officers streamed toward the Richard J. Daley Center before 8 o'clock. Its massive steel sculpture cast a long shadow across the plaza while pigeons circled overhead. Emmett Sanders stepped out of his white Ford Transit wearing the same navy suit he had worn to the charity gala. Nothing expensive. Nothing designed to impress. The jacket had been tailored years earlier. The leather shoes had been polished by his own hands before sunrise. He carried only a slim black folder. No designer briefcase, no luxury watch. no attempt to look wealthier than he appeared. Rebecca Lawson walked beside him with calm confidence. Her gray coat moved gently in the wind as she climbed the courthouse steps. She glanced toward Emmett. "Nervous?" He looked at the crowd entering security. "No." "Angry?" "No." "What are you?" He watched two janitors polishing the marble entrance while lawyers hurried past without noticing them. "Curious." Rebecca smiled faintly. "That's probably healthier." Inside, security lines moved slowly. Metal detectors beeped. Deputies checked bags. Attorneys greeted each other by first name. Families sat nervously on wooden benches waiting for hearings that would change their lives forever. Divorce, custody, bankruptcy, inheritance. Every hallway carried quiet heartbreak. Courtroom. 2107 occupied the west side of the building. The hearing itself would be brief. Temporary motions, financial disclosures, scheduling. Nothing dramatic. Yet, Emmett knew first impressions often shaped everything that followed. Olivia arrived 5 minutes later. She wore a cream business suit and carried herself with effortless confidence. Her attorney, Charles Whitaker, walked beside her holding two thick binders. Several people turned to look. She belonged in expensive courtrooms, luxury offices, executive boardrooms. She did not look toward Emmett immediately. When she finally did, her eyes paused briefly on his simple suit, then moved away. No smile, no greeting, nothing. Nathan Pierce was nowhere to be seen, but his absence somehow felt deliberate. Rebecca quietly organized documents across the counsel table. Financial disclosure requests, discovery motions, protective orders, every page perfectly tabbed, every exhibit labeled. Emmett remained silent. His hands rested calmly together. The courtroom slowly filled. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered promptly at 9. Everyone stood. The hearing began. Charles Whitaker spoke first. His voice carried polished confidence earned through decades of family law. He described Olivia as a successful professional who had supported the household while her husband remained employed in low-paying maintenance work. He argued she deserved temporary financial assistance during the divorce proceedings. He emphasized lifestyle, household expenses, future stability. Then he mentioned sacrifice. Mrs. Sanders carried the economic burden of this marriage for years. Emmett never reacted. Rebecca wrote 2 short notes before standing. Her presentation lasted less than 4 minutes. She challenged nothing emotionally. She attacked only procedure. Financial disclosures remained incomplete. Asset verification had not been exchanged. Business records required examination. Income claims required documentation. Nothing more, nothing less. The judge listened carefully, then adjusted her glasses. "I will order both parties to exchange complete financial disclosures within 30 days. No temporary ruling will be entered until documentation is reviewed." Her gavel struck softly. The hearing ended. Less than 20 minutes. Outside the courtroom, attorneys immediately gathered into separate conversations. Rebecca placed her files into a leather case. "They expected you to panic." "I noticed." "They expected a quick settlement." "I know." She looked directly at him. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing." The hallway outside remained crowded. People moved toward elevators carrying folders and coffee cups. A deputy directed visitors toward another courtroom. Somewhere, a child cried. Somewhere else, a couple argued quietly beside a vending machine. Life continued. Then Emmett noticed a familiar face. Nathan Pierce stood nearly 50 feet away near the elevator bank. He wore another tailored gray suit. His posture remained relaxed. He spoke with a middle-aged man wearing a Whitmore and Klein employee badge clipped to his jacket pocket. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. A handshake followed. Nathan smiled. Then both men entered separate elevators. The doors closed. Gone. Rebecca noticed Emmett watching. "You know him. I've seen him before." She followed his gaze. "The other man works for Whitmore. You recognize him." "I've reviewed enough corporate filings." She remained quiet for several moments, then spoke softly. This just became more interesting. Outside the courthouse, reporters interviewed attorneys from unrelated cases. Camera crews crowded the sidewalks. Traffic horns echoed through downtown. Olivia exited with Charles Whitaker and climbed into a black SUV waiting beside the curb. She never looked toward Emmett. Perhaps she believed the morning had gone exactly as planned. Perhaps she believed time remained on her side. Emmett stood beside Rebecca, watching the vehicle disappear into traffic. His phone vibrated. A secure message from Sanders and Cole Compliance had arrived. Subject: Urgent Internal Review. He opened it. Attached were preliminary audit findings from Whitmore and Klein Tower. Vendor discrepancies identified. Consulting payments flagged. Multiple approvals under investigation. Additional documentation requested immediately. Emmett locked the screen without replying. The wind carried fallen leaves across the courthouse plaza. Rebecca looked at him. "What is it?" He slipped the phone into his pocket. "The paperwork is starting to talk." "And what is it saying?" Emmett watched another city bus pass through the intersection. Its windows reflected the courthouse behind them. "It says someone has been stealing. And they're getting careless." Far above the streets, gray clouds gathered once again over Chicago. Somewhere inside Whitmore and Klein Tower, thousands of ordinary invoices sat quietly inside filing cabinets. Most people would never read them, but Emmett Sanders already knew that the smallest line on a forgotten piece of paper could destroy careers, marriages, and fortunes alike. And before another week was over, the paper trail would lead somewhere no one expected. The following Wednesday began before sunrise. Chicago's financial district remained unusually quiet as Emmett Sanders drove north along LaSalle Street beneath a pale blue sky streaked with thin autumn clouds. The city had not fully awakened yet. Street sweepers moved slowly along empty curbs. Coffee shops were just unlocking their doors. Delivery trucks backed into loading docks, while commuters hurried toward subway entrances with collars raised against the morning wind. Emmett parked beside an old stone bank building that had stood in Chicago for nearly a century. The brass letters above its entrance read First Midwest Private Trust. He shut off the engine and remained inside for a moment. The old Ford Transit ticked softly as the engine cooled. On the passenger seat rested a leather document case. Inside were trust agreements, ownership certificates, estate records, and legal correspondence dating back almost 20 years. Rebecca Lawson had insisted he retrieve everything personally. "Paper survives longer than memory," she had told him. He stepped onto the sidewalk and entered the building. Inside, polished marble floors reflected warm chandeliers hanging above the lobby. Security guards greeted regular clients by name. Private banking offices lined the upper floors behind frosted glass walls. Most visitors arrived wearing expensive suits. Emmett arrived wearing work boots beneath simple slacks. No one paid much attention to him. He preferred it that way. A banker named Michael Grayson welcomed him into a private office overlooking LaSalle Street. The two men had known each other for nearly 15 years. There was no small talk. Michael unlocked a secure cabinet and placed a narrow steel box onto the conference table. "The access log you requested." Emmett nodded quietly. Michael slid several printed pages across the table. Every visit to the safe deposit vault had been recorded electronically. Dates, times, authorized signatures, identification records. Emmett reviewed each page carefully. Nothing unusual appeared until 2 months earlier. A request for vault access had been submitted online using household information connected to the Sanders residence. The request had been denied automatically because Olivia Sanders was not an authorized trustee. A follow-up phone inquiry had arrived the following afternoon. Again, denied. No entry had occurred. No documents had been removed. But someone had clearly tried. Emmett closed the file. His expression never changed. Years ago, Rebecca had recommended placing Sanders and Cole ownership inside a family trust protected from future marital disputes. Harold Cole's estate attorney had structured everything carefully. The arrangement was legal, transparent, well documented. Olivia had never asked about it. Perhaps she assumed there was nothing worth asking. Perhaps she simply never imagined the quiet janitor sitting across from her at breakfast controlled assets worth tens of millions of dollars. Michael folded his hands. "I'm sorry things have reached this point." Emmett offered a faint smile. "So am I." They signed several confirmation forms before the banker returned the documents. No dramatic conversation followed. Business remained business. Outside, the city had grown busier. Taxi horns echoed through intersections. Lawyers hurried between office towers carrying briefcases. Construction crews repaired sidewalks beneath orange warning signs. Life continued with its usual indifference. Emmett drove directly toward Rebecca Lawson's office. She already had fresh coffee waiting. The conference room overlooked the Chicago River where tourist boats drifted beneath raised bridges. Rebecca spread new paperwork across the table. Phone records, financial disclosures, subpoena requests, corporate audit updates. She worked with calm efficiency. The court approved expanded discovery. Emmett listened quietly. Rebecca continued, "We're requesting banking records connected to Pierce Strategic Consulting. Phone records between Nathan Pierce and Olivia. Electronic payment histories. Vendor approvals." She paused before sliding another document across the table. Temporary support request. Olivia's attorneys continued arguing that Emmett lacked meaningful financial resources. Rebecca almost smiled. "They're building an entire case around a version of you that doesn't exist." Emmett looked out the window. A tugboat pushed two barges slowly across the river. Appearances often moved more slowly than truth. He signed several authorizations. Rebecca organized them into separate folders. "If they're hiding something, documentation will find it." He stood. "So will patience." By late afternoon, Emmett returned to Oak Park. The townhouse looked unusually busy. Professional photographers moved furniture. Two decorators arranged flowers near the fireplace. Bright lights illuminated the living room. Olivia stood near the staircase speaking with a real estate agent. She noticed Emmett entering. The conversation stopped immediately. The photographer quietly stepped into another room. The agent offered an awkward nod before pretending to study the windows. Olivia crossed her arms. "We're preparing listing photos." Emmett looked around. Family pictures had disappeared. His books were gone. The living room looked like a luxury showroom instead of a home. "You didn't mention selling." "It makes financial sense." She spoke as though discussing office furniture rather than 12 years of marriage. The agent excused himself and walked outside. The photographers followed. Soon the house became quiet again. Olivia faced him across the empty dining room. "I assume you've started looking for somewhere to live." "I have." "You'll probably want something close to work." Her tone carried quiet superiority. "Maybe near the industrial district." "It'll save gas." Emmett simply nodded. "I'll manage." She seemed disappointed by his calmness. Arguments required participation. He refused to provide it. Instead, he walked upstairs. The bedroom looked untouched. His closet remained half full. He removed only 3 gray uniforms, 2 pairs of jeans, several shirts, and one small wooden picture frame. The photograph showed Harold Cole standing beside the company's first service truck 23 years earlier. The frame fit neatly inside a cardboard box. Nothing else seemed important. By evening, the Ford Transit rolled south through Chicago once again. This time it stopped beside a red brick warehouse owned by Sanders and Cole Facility Solutions. A narrow staircase climbed to a modest apartment above the loading docks. The rooms were small, simple, functional. A single bedroom, tiny kitchen, old hardwood floors. Nothing luxurious, yet the silence inside felt different. Peaceful instead of lonely. Emmett unpacked slowly. He hung his uniforms neatly inside the closet, placed Harold's photograph beside the bed, set the metal lunch cooler on the kitchen counter. Outside, warehouse workers finished loading overnight delivery trucks. Forklifts beeped across the parking lot. Somewhere below, employees laughed while ending their shift. Emmett stood beside the window overlooking the yard. The city lights stretched toward the horizon. His phone vibrated softly. A new encrypted message from Sanders and Cole Compliance had arrived. Subject: Preliminary Forensic Review complete. He opened the attachment. The first highlighted transfer totaled $247,000. Destination: Pierce Strategic Consulting. Supporting documentation insufficient. Emmett read the page twice, then another, then another. By the time he reached the final summary, one realization settled quietly over him. The fraud was far larger than anyone had first imagined, and Olivia's name had just appeared for the first time inside the auditor's financial timeline. Long before Sanders and Cole Facility Solutions managed skyscrapers across Illinois, it had existed inside the trunk of an old Chevrolet pickup with faded blue paint and nearly 200,000 miles on its engine. Emmett Sanders remembered every dent in that truck. He remembered the cracked windshield held together by clear tape, the rust spreading beneath the driver's side door, the smell of bleach and motor oil that never disappeared from the seats. Most of all, he remembered Harold Cole. Harold had been 28 when they first met inside an abandoned manufacturing plant outside Joliet. Both men had just lost their jobs after the cleaning contractor they worked for declared bankruptcy without paying its employees for 6 weeks. The owner disappeared. The payroll vanished. The workers went home empty-handed. Harold had laughed anyway. "If nobody wants to clean the buildings," he had said, "maybe we should own the mops instead." The joke became a business plan. Neither man possessed money. Neither had investors. Neither had college degrees. They possessed 1 pickup truck, 3 industrial mops, 2 borrowed floor buffers, and enough determination to work until sunrise every day if necessary. For months, they accepted every contract available. Church basements, small warehouses, community clinics, public schools, apartment buildings, office complexes nobody else wanted. Emmett often worked 16-hour days. He cleaned floors all night, met customers all morning, delivered invoices himself every afternoon, then repeated the process again. Harold handled repairs, equipment, scheduling. Together they slowly built trust. They never advertised aggressively. Satisfied clients simply recommended them to others. 1 contract became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became 50. Years passed. The company expanded quietly across northern Illinois. By the time Sanders and Cole reached its 10th anniversary, more than 400 employees worked beneath its name. Emmett never stopped visiting job sites. He believed leadership should smell the same disinfectant as the crews who earned the contracts. Executives often laughed at that philosophy. Customers never did. Now, standing inside the executive conference room at Sanders and Cole headquarters, Emmett looked across the polished table toward Rebecca Lawson and the company's compliance director, Daniel Cooper. Daniel placed 3 thick binders on the table. Preliminary audit complete. The words hung quietly in the room. Rebecca opened the first binder. Color-coded tabs divided hundreds of pages. Invoices, vendor contracts, wire transfers, consulting agreements, internal approvals. Daniel adjusted his glasses. The irregularities extend across 14 months. He pointed toward several highlighted pages. Pierce Strategic Consulting received payments totaling just over $3 million. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. For consulting services? Daniel nodded. That's what the invoices claim. And the work? Daniel looked toward Emmett. We can't find evidence that most of it ever existed. The room fell silent. Outside the conference windows, forklifts moved between loading docks below. Warehouse workers loaded supplies for overnight cleaning crews. Ordinary people beginning ordinary shifts. None of them knew millions of dollars might have disappeared through paperwork nobody questioned. Daniel opened another binder. This becomes more concerning. He slid several documents across the table. The consulting invoices referenced emergency inspections supposedly performed at Whitmore and Klein Tower. Emmett recognized every listed date immediately. He had personally worked inside that building undercover during many of those nights. No emergency inspections had occurred. No consulting teams had entered. No special projects had taken place. Someone had billed imaginary work. Rebecca leaned forward. Who approved payment? Daniel pointed toward multiple signatures. Finance managers, regional directors, outside consultants, different names, different departments. Yet one outside company appeared repeatedly. Pierce Strategic Consulting. The pattern no longer resembled accounting mistakes, it resembled coordination. Emmett quietly turned another page. The final attachment showed corporate hospitality expenses, luxury restaurants, private clubs, hotel suites, entertainment reimbursements. One receipt stopped him. Maison Vert, Fulton Market, Friday evening. The same restaurant where he had watched Olivia remove her wedding ring before dinner with Nathan Pierce. The amount exceeded $3,000, charged to consulting development. His eyes remained fixed on the page. Rebecca noticed immediately. You've seen this before. He nodded once. I was outside. Neither lawyer nor auditor asked further questions. No explanation was necessary. Daniel continued. Our forensic accountants traced additional transfers. He projected a flowchart onto the conference room screen. Money moved from Whitmore and Klein into Pierce Strategic Consulting, then into several shell accounts. Finally toward luxury purchases, travel, marketing contracts, event management firms. The lines intersected repeatedly. One account name appeared unexpectedly. Olivia Creative Strategies, LLC. Emmett looked toward the screen without speaking. The amount itself was not enormous. Several consulting payments totaling approximately $87,000, labeled branding consultation, corporate event design, marketing coordination, perfectly ordinary descriptions, perfectly questionable timing. Rebecca folded her arms. Can we prove services weren't performed? Daniel answered carefully. Not yet. But documentation is extremely weak, and the payments overlap directly with the fraudulent consulting contracts. Emmett stood and walked toward the conference room window. The loading docks below bustled with activity. Young custodians joked while stacking supplies onto trucks. Supervisors checked schedules. Mechanics repaired floor machines. Nobody there wore expensive suits. Nobody there sought recognition. Yet every one of them produced real work, real value, real results. He thought about Olivia's words. I'm tired of being married to a janitor. Perhaps she had mistaken quiet labor for failure. Perhaps she had confused appearances with worth. Rebecca joined him by the window. "What are you thinking?" Emmett watched one young employee help an older custodian lift heavy equipment into a van. Harold used to say, "Buildings never lie." Rebecca smiled. "I remember." He also said paperwork eventually tells the same truth. Daniel closed the binders. "What do you want to do?" Emmett turned back toward the table. His answer came calmly. "Send everything." Rebecca understood immediately. Outside counsel, yes. Board of directors, yes. Compliance, yes. No delays. No warnings. No private conversations. The law would speak, not emotion. Daniel gathered every binder carefully. Electronic copies had already been secured. Audit trails preserved. Financial backups archived. Nothing would disappear now. As the meeting ended, Emmett remained alone inside the conference room. Harold's old photograph stood quietly on the bookshelf behind his desk. The faded pickup truck. The two young men smiling beside borrowed equipment. Neither of them could have imagined this moment. Neither would have believed that success itself might someday require hiding behind a janitor's uniform. Emmett picked up the framed picture. For several seconds he stared silently at Harold's face. Then he placed the photograph back exactly where it belonged. Outside, Chicago prepared for another night. Thousands of lights appeared across office towers stretching toward Lake Michigan. Somewhere high above those streets, executives continued signing invoices. Somewhere else, Nathan Pierce likely believed another profitable week had ended. He had no idea that before dawn arrived, every suspicious contract bearing his name would be sitting on the desks of attorneys who specialized in corporate fraud. And once that process began, there would be no quiet way to stop it. The first box arrived at Rebecca Lawson's office at exactly 8:17 on Tuesday morning. A courier wearing a navy windbreaker wheeled in 3 sealed archive cartons marked with bright red evidence tape. Each box contained copies of financial records collected during Sanders and Cole's internal compliance review, invoices, vendor contracts, wire transfers, email authorizations, audit summaries, thousands of pages. Rebecca signed the delivery receipt without expression. She knew paper could destroy lives more efficiently than anger ever could. Across town, Emmett Sanders was already halfway through another overnight shift. The marble lobby of Whitmore and Klein Tower gleamed beneath rows of recessed lights while the city outside slowly disappeared into darkness. His mop moved with the same steady rhythm it had followed for years. Back and forth, straight lines, no wasted motion. Visitors often assumed cleaning required little thought. Emmett knew otherwise. Every polished floor reflected footprints. Every fingerprint left residue. Every stain told a story. Truth usually did the same. At 2 in the morning, he stepped into the service elevator carrying a fresh trash liner. Luis Ramirez waited inside holding a maintenance clipboard. "You hear the rumors?" Emmett shook his head. "What rumors?" "Finance department." Luis lowered his voice. "They say outside auditors are coming next week." The elevator doors closed. Steel cables hummed above them. Emmett looked toward the floor indicator. Level 38, 39, 40. "What kind of audit?" Luis shrugged. "No idea. But managers have been nervous. They've been shredding paper like crazy." The elevator reached executive level 48. The doors opened. Luis stepped out first. Before leaving, he glanced back. "My cousin works accounting downtown. He says nervous executives always clean their desks before investigators arrive." Emmett smiled quietly. "They should clean their books instead." Luis laughed before disappearing down the hallway. The corridor became silent again. Emmett resumed work. Conference room 48B stood empty. Coffee cups remained scattered across the polished table. Several legal pads covered with handwritten notes had been left behind. He collected them without reading. Procedure mattered. Respect mattered. The cleaning cart rolled toward the executive recycling station. Another secure disposal container stood waiting. This one had been locked correctly. Compliance stickers remained intact. Someone had learned from earlier mistakes, or perhaps someone had grown afraid. By sunrise, Emmett finished his shift and drove directly to Rebecca's office. The conference room table looked almost buried beneath documents. Daniel Cooper stood beside a projection screen displaying spreadsheets that stretched across multiple monitors. Rebecca handed Emmett a binder nearly 3 inches thick. "Read page 72. He opened carefully. The page contained ownership disclosures submitted by both parties for the divorce proceedings. Olivia's attorney had listed Emmett's occupation as maintenance custodian. Annual income estimate, $58,400. Business ownership none known. Investment holdings minimal retirement account. Rebecca folded her arms. They built their entire financial strategy around this assumption. Daniel slid another folder across the table. Inside rested official ownership records from the Illinois Secretary of State. Sanders and Coal Facility Solutions. Majority shareholder Emmett James Sanders. Ownership interest 62%. Estimated corporate valuation confidential. The contrast between the two documents almost seemed absurd. One described a struggling janitor. The other described the principal owner of one of the region's fastest-growing commercial maintenance companies. Rebecca smiled for the first time that morning. They never performed due diligence. They judged the uniform. Emmett closed the binder. He felt no satisfaction, only sadness. He had never hidden his work. He simply never bragged about it. Years earlier, Harold Cole had often repeated one sentence to new supervisors. "If your title matters more than your work, you've already failed." That lesson had remained with Emmett long after Harold died. Daniel cleared his throat. "We have another development." He projected a new chart onto the screen. Electronic fund transfers appeared as blue lines connecting multiple companies: Whitmore and Klein, Pierce Strategic Consulting, several shell corporations. Finally, Olivia Creative Strategies, LLC. Rebecca leaned closer. Amount, $87,412. Purpose, corporate branding consultation. Daniel clicked another page. No invoices, no work product, no design files, no deliverables. Nothing existed beyond payment approvals. Rebecca remained quiet for several seconds. Then she reached for her phone. "I'm calling federal counsel." Daniel looked surprised. "You think it's that serious?" "I think interstate wire transfers deserve attention." The room fell silent again. Outside, river traffic moved beneath the bridges while commuter trains crossed the city toward suburban stations. Chicago continued functioning normally. Inside the conference room, the legal landscape had shifted completely. By afternoon, subpoenas had been drafted. Financial institutions would receive preservation notices. Electronic records would be secured. Vendor accounts frozen if necessary. No accusations had yet been filed, only questions. But questions backed by documentation often became dangerous. Emmett left the office shortly before sunset. Instead of driving home, he stopped at the Sanders and Cole warehouse. Workers prepared equipment for overnight contracts. Young custodians loaded chemicals onto trucks. Floor technicians inspected buffer machines. A supervisor reviewed schedules taped to the wall. Nobody treated Emmett like a millionaire. They greeted him exactly as they always had. "Evening, boss." "Need anything, Emmett?" "Coffee's fresh." He walked through the warehouse slowly, checking machines, asking about families, helping one mechanic tighten a loose wheel on a cleaning cart. The conversations remained ordinary. Children starting college, car repairs, weekend fishing trips, real life. No boardroom could replace it. Luis called unexpectedly just after 8. "You still coming tonight?" "I'll be there." Luis hesitated. Something strange happened. What? Whitmore's finance vice president cleared out his office. Boxes everywhere. He left before lunch. No announcement. No goodbye. The line became quiet. Then Luis added one final sentence. It looked like somebody knew something was coming. After hanging up, Emmett stood alone beside the loading dock. The evening air carried the smell of diesel fuel and fresh rain. Forklifts moved across the yard under bright security lights. He looked toward the Chicago skyline rising in the distance. Hundreds of windows glowed against the darkening sky. Somewhere among those towers, people were already trying to protect themselves. Deleting emails, destroying records, making phone calls, building excuses. But paper left trails, money left trails, and panic often left the clearest trail of all. When Emmett finally climbed into the old Ford Transit and started the engine, he no longer felt like a husband defending his marriage. He felt like a witness waiting for the truth to reach the courtroom. And before another week ended, someone far more powerful than Nathan Pierce would receive a subpoena with his own signature attached to it. The warehouse apartment above Sanders and Cole's loading docks had only 6 windows. 4 faced the freight yard. 2 overlooked the railroad tracks stretching south toward the industrial neighborhoods beyond downtown Chicago. The walls were plain brick. The kitchen held little more than a stove, a refrigerator, and an old oak table that Harold Cole had rescued from a closed church years before. Emmett liked the simplicity. Nothing inside the apartment pretended to be more valuable than it was. Everything served a purpose. Late Thursday afternoon, sunlight poured through the western windows, painting long golden lines across the hardwood floor. Emmett sat quietly reviewing another stack of compliance reports while a pot of coffee cooled beside him. The apartment remained silent except for distant train horns and the occasional backup alarm from forklifts below. His phone vibrated. Rebecca Lawson. They served the subpoenas. Emmett closed the folder in front of him. All of them. Bank records, vendor records, electronic communications, and Nathan Pierce. He has legal representation now. Her voice remained calm. Things will move faster from here. Emmett thanked her quietly before ending the call. For several minutes he simply watched dust float through the afternoon sunlight. His life had become divided into paperwork and waiting. Neither required anger. Both required patience. A knock echoed through the apartment. One slow knock, then another. He stood, walked toward the door, opened it. Olivia stood in the hallway. She wore dark sunglasses despite the fading daylight. A beige trench coat covered the business suit beneath. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The freight elevator behind her closed with a metallic thud. Somewhere below, warehouse workers continued loading equipment without noticing who had arrived. Emmett stepped aside. "If you're here to talk, come in." She entered cautiously. Her eyes moved across the apartment. The small kitchen, the old table, the framed photograph of Harold Cole, the neatly folded uniforms hanging beside the bedroom door. Nothing luxurious, nothing impressive, only order, only quiet. She removed her sunglasses. The confidence she had worn inside the courthouse weeks earlier seemed noticeably thinner. "You moved." "I did." She looked around again. "I didn't know where else to find you." Emmett poured another cup of coffee and placed it across the table. She did not touch it. Instead, she remained standing. "I've been trying to call." I know. You never answered. I didn't think there was anything left to discuss. The silence that followed felt heavier than argument. Outside, another freight train rolled past, slowly its steel wheels echoing through the neighborhood. Olivia finally sat down. She folded her hands together, then unfolded them again. I made mistakes. Emmett listened. Nothing more. She continued. I thought Nathan understood business. I thought he was helping me. I didn't know everything. Her words came carefully, almost rehearsed, almost convincing. Emmett studied the steam rising from his coffee. He remembered another afternoon years earlier when Olivia had cried because they could not afford a vacation. Back then, every apology between them had felt genuine. Today, everything sounded negotiated. I believed him, she said quietly. He told me opportunities only come once. He said people like us deserve better. Emmett finally looked toward her. People like us. She lowered her eyes. You know what I mean. He did. He simply wished she had never learned to think that way. Olivia reached into her handbag and removed a folded tissue. She twisted it nervously between her fingers. I never wanted this to become public. Neither did Emmett. Marriage should have remained private. Trust should have remained private. Instead, attorneys and accountants now examined pieces of their lives line by line. Neither of them had truly won. Emmett spoke softly. Did you lie? She looked confused. About what? The financial disclosures. She remained silent. The court papers. No answer came. He asked again. Did you knowingly sign statements saying I had no business interests? Still nothing. The apartment seemed unusually quiet. Even the trains outside had stopped. Olivia finally whispered, my attorney prepared everything. Emmett nodded once. But you signed it. Her eyes drifted toward the floor. That silence answered better than words. He stood and carried his coffee mug to the sink. Water ran softly from the faucet. When he returned, Olivia remained seated exactly where he had left her. Smaller, somehow. Less certain. I don't hate you, Emmett said quietly. She looked up immediately. I don't, but I can't trust you anymore. The words carried no anger, only exhaustion. I think Nathan manipulated both of us. Emmett shook his head gently. He manipulated money. You made choices. The distinction lingered between them. For the first time since arriving, tears formed quietly in Olivia's eyes. She wiped them away before they could fall. I didn't know things would go this far. Emmett believed that. Few people ever expected consequences until they arrived. She stood slowly. So, what happens now? He walked toward the front door. Our lawyers communicate. No more private meetings. No more phone calls. No more explanations. She stared at him. That's it. I think that's all we have left. He opened the door. Cold evening air entered the apartment. Warehouse lights flickered on below as workers prepared overnight routes across the city. Olivia hesitated before leaving. She looked once more at the apartment. At Harold's photograph, at the gray uniforms. At the quiet man she had spent years believing she understood. Then she stepped into the hallway. The elevator doors closed behind her. Emmett remained standing until the sound disappeared. Only then did he return to the kitchen. Another envelope rested beside the coffee pot. Delivered earlier that afternoon. He had not opened it. The sender's name read Midwest Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. Inside were certified copies of wire transfer records obtained through subpoena. He unfolded the first page carefully. One transfer, then another, then another. Large sums moved through shell companies before arriving at accounts connected to Nathan Pierce. Toward the end of the report, one highlighted transaction caught his attention. The destination account belonged to Olivia Creative Strategies, LLC. The amount exceeded $120,000, transferred less than 48 hours after dinner at Maison Vert. Emmett closed the file. Outside the window, darkness settled over Chicago. Below him, janitorial crews climbed into company vans and disappeared toward office towers across the city. The workers would spend the night quietly cleaning floors that thousands of strangers would walk across the next morning without ever noticing. Emmett watched the headlights disappear through the warehouse gates. Then he looked once more at the wire transfer report resting on the kitchen table. The truth was no longer hidden. It had become numbered, time-stamped, certified. And before long, it would be impossible for anyone to explain away. The federal subpoenas reached downtown Chicago before sunrise on Monday. By 8 o'clock, receptionists inside Whitmore and Klein Tower had already whispered about unusual visitors carrying dark leather briefcases and government credentials. No one announced an investigation. No alarms sounded. No reporters waited outside. The building looked exactly the same as it had every other Monday morning. Employees carried coffee into elevators. Executives hurried toward conference rooms. Cleaning crews emptied trash bins from the weekend. Only those who understood corporate law recognized the significance of certified envelopes delivered by federal couriers. They rarely arrived by accident. Emmett Sanders began his shift that evening the same way he always did. He parked the aging white Ford Transit beneath the service entrance, changed into his gray uniform, tied the drawstrings on his work gloves, pushed his cleaning cart toward the elevators. Nothing about him suggested he had spent the afternoon meeting attorneys specializing in financial crimes. That anonymity remained his greatest advantage. The lobby security desk looked unusually busy. Luis Ramirez leaned closer as Emmett signed the overnight log. "You picked an interesting week to work." Emmett smiled slightly. "Why, 3 federal agents came through this morning. They met with executives upstairs. They stayed almost 4 hours." Luis lowered his voice. "I've worked security 15 years. I've never seen management look that nervous." Emmett nodded quietly. People often believed investigations began with arrests. They rarely understood that panic usually arrived first. The elevator carried him toward executive level 48. The doors opened. Silence greeted him. Normally, several assistants remained late preparing presentations for the next morning. Tonight, almost every office sat empty. Computer screens had been switched off. File cabinets stood locked. Conference rooms remained dark. The atmosphere felt different. Careful, watchful, almost afraid. He pushed his cart toward the finance department. Near the corner office, 2 maintenance workers removed cardboard boxes filled with old files scheduled for off-site storage. One supervisor signed inventory sheets while another sealed cartons with bright security tape. Emmett recognized none of the paperwork. He simply continued mopping. Invisible, patient. One accountant remained inside the finance suite, a young woman named Melissa Harper. She had worked there less than 2 years. Normally cheerful, she now looked exhausted. Stacks of folders surrounded her desk. Coffee cups lined the windowsill. She barely noticed Emmett replacing trash liners beside her office. Then, suddenly, she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" He stopped. "Of course." She looked toward the hallway to ensure nobody else remained nearby. "Have you ever regretted staying honest?" The question surprised him. He considered answering immediately. Instead, he folded the fresh trash bag neatly inside the container, then looked back toward her. "No," she laughed softly. "You answered too quickly. I've had years to think about it." She stared at several invoices lying across her desk. "My father drove city buses. He always told me shortcuts cost more than long roads. Emmett nodded. My father said something similar. Melissa sighed. I hope he was right. She gathered the papers into a folder before locking them inside a cabinet. The conversation ended there, yet something about her expression remained with him as he continued working. Fear often looked exactly like exhaustion. Near midnight, Rebecca Lawson called. Her voice sounded more serious than usual. The banking subpoenas came back, and they traced additional transfers. How many? Rebecca paused. More than 40. The number lingered silently between them. She continued. Money moved through 6 different shell companies before reaching Pierce Strategic Consulting. And Olivia? Several deposits reached her business account. But we found something new. Emmett waited. The money didn't stay there. It moved again. Where? Luxury real estate escrow. The hallway suddenly seemed much quieter. Rebecca explained further. Nathan Pierce had apparently been purchasing investment property through nominee companies. Large down payments, luxury condominiums, commercial spaces. Everything funded through layers of fraudulent consulting payments. The pattern suggested long-term planning. Not impulsive theft, organized laundering. Rebecca lowered her voice. Federal investigators are interested now. Very interested. After ending the call, Emmett stood beside the window overlooking the Chicago River. The city lights shimmered across black water below. Tour boats had long disappeared. Only tugboats remained. Slow, steady, purposeful. Much like truth itself. At 1:30 in the morning, another unusual visitor entered the executive floor. Nathan Pierce. He wore no suit jacket, only a wrinkled white shirt with sleeves rolled above his elbows. His tie hung loosely around his neck. He walked quickly toward the finance offices without noticing the janitor polishing marble floors nearby. 20 minutes later, raised voices drifted faintly through closed doors. No words became clear, only tension, only urgency. Then silence. Nathan emerged, looking noticeably different. His face had lost its practiced confidence. He carried no briefcase, no smile. He walked rapidly toward the elevators while speaking into his phone. Destroy nothing. Talk to nobody. My attorney. The elevator doors closed before the rest became audible. Emmett resumed mopping. His movements remained slow and deliberate. Another ordinary janitor finishing another ordinary shift. Yet he understood something Nathan did not. When innocent people panic, they search for explanations. When guilty people panic, they search for exits. Dawn approached. Cleaning crews gathered equipment inside the service corridor before clocking out. Luis waved goodbye from the security desk. The first executives of the morning began arriving carrying laptops and breakfast sandwiches. They stepped across freshly polished floors without noticing who had cleaned them. Emmett removed his gloves, placed them inside the metal lunch cooler, walked toward the parking garage. Before climbing into the old Ford Transit, he checked his phone one final time. A secure message from Rebecca had arrived only seconds earlier. 3 words. They found him. Attached beneath the message was a federal warrant bearing Nathan Pierce's name. Emmett looked once toward the skyline as the first sunlight reflected across the glass towers of downtown Chicago. Somewhere inside one of those buildings, men who believed paperwork could be buried beneath shredded files and expensive lawyers were beginning to discover something much stronger than money. Evidence. And evidence had finally started speaking louder than appearances. The settlement conference took place on a gray Thursday morning inside a quiet law office overlooking the Chicago River. Unlike the courthouse, there were no spectators, no deputies, no reporters. Only lawyers, accountants, and stacks of documents arranged across polished walnut tables. The room smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. Outside the windows, tugboats pushed barges beneath steel bridges, while office workers hurried through the cold wind below. Inside, every conversation remained measured. Every word carried consequences. Emmett Sanders arrived first. He wore the same Navy suit he had worn since the beginning of the divorce. Rebecca Lawson walked beside him, carrying 2 leather binders and a tablet computer. Neither hurried, neither spoke much. The receptionist led them into Conference Room 4. Large windows overlooked downtown. Water glasses sat beside every chair. Pens rested neatly beside legal pads. The room looked almost peaceful. 20 minutes later, Olivia entered with Charles Whitaker. She looked noticeably different from the woman who had slid divorce papers across the kitchen island weeks earlier. The confidence remained. But something underneath had changed. Her smile appeared forced. Dark circles rested beneath carefully applied makeup. She nodded politely toward Rebecca, then briefly toward Emmett. He returned the gesture. Nothing more, no bitterness, no greeting, only acknowledgement. The mediator entered precisely at 9. A retired judge with decades of family law experience. He introduced himself, explained the procedure, reminded everyone that settlement remained voluntary, then invited Charles Whitaker to begin. Olivia's attorney spoke confidently. He reviewed marital assets, the Oak Park townhouse, retirement accounts, furniture, vehicles, household property. His presentation suggested Olivia deserved significant support. Based upon years of unequal financial opportunity, Rebecca listened quietly without interruption. When Charles finished, she opened the first binder. Inside rested ownership certificates from Sanders and Cole Facility Solutions, trust agreements, corporate valuations, tax filings, state registrations, every page professionally organized. She slid the documents across the table. Charles read silently. His expression changed almost immediately. The mediator noticed. "So, these ownership interests were disclosed," Rebecca answered calmly. "They have now been disclosed." Silence settled over the room. Charles turned another page, then another. Estimated valuations, protected trust structures, corporate governance agreements. Everything perfectly legal. Everything established years before the marriage. The assumptions supporting Olivia's financial requests began collapsing one document at a time. The mediator adjusted his glasses. "This changes matters significantly." Rebecca nodded. "There is more." She opened the second binder. Bank transfers, consulting invoices, vendor payments, compliance summaries, federal preservation notices. No accusations appeared. Only facts, only records, only timelines. Olivia stared quietly at the pages. She never touched them. Her attorney did. His eyes moved faster with every page. Rebecca spoke softly. "We are not litigating fraud here. But false financial representations create obvious complications." Charles closed the binder. His confidence had disappeared. He requested a short recess. The mediator agreed. Everyone stood. Olivia walked toward the windows overlooking the river. Emmett remained seated. Rebecca quietly reviewed notes. No one spoke for nearly 5 minutes. Then Charles returned, carrying his phone. His face had grown pale. He leaned toward Olivia and whispered several sentences. She looked at him. Then toward Rebecca. Then toward Emmett. Confusion slowly became realization. The federal investigation had become impossible to ignore. Another attorney had apparently informed Charles that Nathan Pierce had retained criminal defense counsel after receiving multiple preservation notices and federal inquiries. The legal landscape had shifted dramatically overnight. The mediation resumed. This time, Charles's tone sounded entirely different. He proposed practical resolutions, division of actual marital property, sale of the townhouse, separate retirement accounts, no temporary maintenance, no future support obligations. Rebecca looked toward Emmett. He nodded once. No revenge, no punishment, only fairness. The mediator drafted terms while assistants printed revised agreements. Hours passed quietly. Outside the conference room, ordinary office life continued. Phones rang, printers worked, secretaries delivered coffee. Inside, 12 years of marriage ended through signatures placed carefully at the bottom of legal documents. Olivia signed first. Her hand trembled slightly. Emmett signed second. His handwriting remained steady. The mediator thanked both parties for maintaining professionalism. Rebecca collected the executed agreements. Charles gathered his files without speaking. The conference ended. People slowly left the room. Olivia remained behind for only a moment. She looked toward Emmett. "I never imagined this." Neither did he. He answered gently, "Neither of us did." She seemed ready to say something more, perhaps an apology, perhaps an explanation. Instead, she simply nodded and walked away. The elevator doors closed behind her. Emmett watched the digital numbers descend, then disappear. By late afternoon, he drove back to Oak Park one final time. The townhouse stood nearly empty. Moving trucks had already removed most furniture. Echoes replaced conversation. The kitchen island, where the divorce papers had first appeared, looked strangely small. He walked through each room slowly. The upstairs office, the guest bedroom, the hallway, the living room. Every space carried memories. Some good, some painful, none permanent. Near the laundry room, he stopped. A single gray work shirt still hung neatly beside the washing machine. The embroidered blue letters above the pocket read Sanders and Cole Facility Solutions. Olivia had once hidden those uniforms in the basement because she found them embarrassing. Now one remained behind. Forgotten. Emmett removed it from the hanger, folded it carefully across his arm. For several seconds he stood quietly inside the empty house. Afternoon sunlight entered through the windows, illuminating dust floating through still air. The silence felt different now. Not lonely, finished. He turned off the lights, locked the front door one final time, then walked toward the old white Ford Transit waiting in the driveway. Neighbors glanced briefly as he drove away. To them, he remained the same quiet janitor who worked strange hours downtown. None of them knew he had just walked away from a fortune, a marriage, and months of betrayal without raising his voice a single time. And as the townhouse disappeared behind him in the rearview mirror, Emmett realized that losing a house hurt far less than losing the illusion that someone truly saw who he had always been. Winter arrived early that year. By the second week of November, thin sheets of ice had begun forming along the edges of the Chicago River, and the first heavy snowfall settled quietly across rooftops before dawn. Downtown looked almost peaceful beneath fresh white snow. Traffic moved slowly. People hurried beneath umbrellas and thick coats. The city seemed softer, quieter, as if trying to hide everything that had happened over the past 2 months. Emmett Sanders stood outside Sanders and Cole Facility Solutions headquarters just after sunrise. Snow rested across the parking lot while employees brushed windshields before beginning another workday. Forklifts left narrow tracks through the loading yard. Delivery vans warmed their engines in long rows beneath security lights. Everything looked ordinary. That was exactly how Emmett preferred it. He walked through the warehouse, greeting employees by name. A mechanic asked about his daughter's college applications. A floor technician joked about the weather. A young janitor proudly showed photographs of his newborn son. Life continued. Contracts still needed to be completed. Hospitals still required cleaning. Schools still opened every morning. Office towers still expected polished floors before executives arrived. The company never stopped because one man's marriage had ended. Inside the main conference room, Rebecca Lawson and Daniel Cooper were already waiting. Coffee steamed beside stacks of neatly organized folders. The final compliance report had arrived. Daniel placed the executive summary on the table. Federal investigators completed their preliminary review. Emmett remained standing. Rebecca quietly opened the report. The findings stretched across dozens of pages. False consulting invoices, wire transfers, shell corporations, fraudulent vendor agreements, money laundering allegations. The evidence had become overwhelming. Nathan Pierce had agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced criminal exposure. Several Whitmore and Klein executives faced civil investigations. Additional criminal referrals remained possible. Rebecca closed the report. It ends here. Emmett looked toward the warehouse windows. Snow continued falling outside. The silence felt strangely comforting. Months earlier, he believed he was losing everything. Now, he realized he had simply been forced to see what had already disappeared long ago. His marriage had ended before the paperwork. Trust had vanished before the betrayal became visible. Only habit had remained. The office door opened softly. An assistant entered carrying one final envelope. No return address, only Emmett's name written carefully across the front. He opened it. Inside rested a handwritten letter. The handwriting belonged to Olivia. He recognized it immediately. The message contained only a few short paragraphs. No legal language, no arguments, no excuses. She admitted she had confused status with character. She admitted she had mistaken silence for weakness. She admitted she had spent years chasing appearances while overlooking the man who quietly built everything around her. The final sentence remained painfully simple. I wish I had asked who you were instead of deciding who you weren't. Emmett folded the letter carefully. He placed it back inside the envelope, then into his desk drawer. Some things deserved preservation, not because they erased pain, but because they explained it. Rebecca watched quietly. You going to answer? Emmett shook his head. No. You've forgiven her. He considered the question, then looked once more toward the falling snow. I don't carry anger. It's too heavy. Rebecca smiled gently. Harold Cole would have approved that answer. Later that afternoon, Emmett drove through downtown Chicago in the old white Ford Transit. The same van, the same faded paint, the same worn steering wheel. Traffic slowed beside Whitmore and Klein Tower. For a brief moment he looked upward. The glass building reflected white clouds drifting above the skyline. Cleaning crews would already be working inside, vacuuming hallways, emptying trash bins, polishing marble floors. Invisible workers preserving buildings that other people claimed credit for. He smiled quietly. Nothing about honest work had ever embarrassed him. At the next intersection, a young maintenance worker pushing a cleaning cart struggled through fresh snow toward another office building. His uniform looked too thin for the weather. Emmett pulled over. He stepped out carrying the insulated work jacket folded behind his own seat. Without introducing himself, he handed it to the young man. You'll need this more than I do. The worker looked surprised. Sir, are you sure? Emmett nodded. Stay warm. Then he climbed back into the van and drove away before the young man could ask another question. No cameras recorded the moment. No headlines would ever mention it. No social media post would collect thousands of likes. Some acts mattered precisely because nobody saw them. That evening, Sanders and Cole employees gathered quietly inside the warehouse cafeteria for their annual winter dinner. Plastic tables, simple decorations, homemade desserts brought by families. Children ran between chairs laughing while mechanics and custodians compared stories from another year of overnight work. No luxury ballroom, no expensive speeches, no television cameras, just working people sharing food. Emmett stood briefly to thank everyone. His speech lasted less than 2 minutes. He spoke about reliability, about showing up when people depended on you, about taking pride in work that strangers rarely noticed. When he finished, the applause lasted longer than his words. Harold Cole's photograph rested on a nearby shelf overlooking the room. For a second, Emmett almost imagined his old friend smiling back. Outside, snow continued falling across Chicago, covering sidewalks, covering rooftops, covering yesterday's footprints. The city would wake tomorrow looking clean again. Not because the storms had erased every mistake, but because quiet people had worked through the night to make a new morning possible. And somewhere beneath the fresh snow, hidden from everyone except those willing to look closely, remained the lesson that had changed Emmett Sanders forever. The world often notices the loudest man in the room, but it is usually the quiet one who has been building something worth protecting all along. No matter how polished the surface looks, true character is revealed by the choices people make when no one is watching. Emmett never won because he was richer, smarter, or more successful than everyone around him. He won because he refused to let bitterness control his actions. He trusted patience over impulse, facts over accusations, and dignity over revenge. In a world that often judges people by their clothes, their job titles, or the cars they drive, his story reminds us that real value is built quietly, one honest decision at a time. Perhaps many of us have experienced something similar. Maybe someone underestimated you because of your appearance, your profession, or your circumstances. Maybe you were overlooked while others chased status and attention. If so, remember that time has a remarkable way of revealing the truth. You never need to prove your worth by speaking louder than everyone else. Let your work, your integrity, and your perseverance tell your story. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been judged unfairly or underestimated by someone you trusted? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might encourage someone else who is quietly fighting the same battle. And if you enjoy emotional stories about resilience, betrayal, justice, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and join us for tomorrow's story. You never know which ordinary person is hiding an extraordinary truth.